Welcome to the Masters of Metrics podcast, helping you get more out of your digital marketing investment. This podcast is proudly hosted by Digivizer, a platform for people who want to grow their business by taking a data-driven approach. Now here's your host, Emma Lo Russo.
Today, I'm joined by Sarah Nichols, the Marketing Director at Bacardi. I've known Sarah for a number of years. We did our MBA together. I'm so excited to be able to share her wisdom with you on Masters of Metrics. Welcome, Sarah.
Hello, nice to be here.
So we are both based in Sydney, and it'd be lovely to be doing this in person. I would have loved to have done it over a glass of wine like we had with your former. So I'd say now perhaps a daiquiri, which is my favourite thing that I'd make with a Bacardi rum. But we're in Zoom. How are you staying sane in lockdown?
So I've taken the approach, because I operate a big team like you do, that I actually like the analogy from when I remember what flying was like, which was, put on the oxygen mask, put it on yourself before everybody else, and take care of yourself. So I've really taken that advice in sort of lockdown too. Been walking a lot with the puppy, as I said before, learning a new language, because just to get away from the drudgery, the day-to-day groundhog sort of day. So, yeah, and that's been good. It starts me off on the right tempo for the day, clear my head, get some exercise in, and then learning something that I've always wanted to do and have never really had the time or made the time for it.
No, it sounds good, and thank goodness for social while we're in lockdown, so we can kind of keep across the lovely walks and the puppy shots and the things that bring a smile to our faces as well. So if we start, Sarah, with your career, like a lot of people jump around industries, you've had a very deep, long association with the liquor industry, and that's been most of your career. But can you walk us through your journey and why this industry it holds your attention, and what took you along the way to where you've ended up?
Sure. I think it all goes back to my purpose in being a marketer. Simon Sinek is very close to my heart. And so if I look at my purpose, which is sort of empowering teams to solve innovative and creative solutions, it's something that I've always done. And so marketing always held a true place in my heart, whether it was in my former career, which was actually running bars and restaurants. So you're right, I have been in liquor since I was about 18. And I think the reason for that start in liquor was, and it wasn't solely in liquor, it was more in food and drink, in the hospitality industry, was my passion for food and beverage. And so for me, it's almost like a hobby that I get paid for. That kind of went from a career in hospitality into jumping into the liquor industry back in the UK. And it wasn't a planned career move at all. Actually, an executive from the then Seagrams, who then had Chivas Regal and brands like Absolut and Martell Cognac, approached me and asked me whether I'd like a job in the liquor industry, running a team of people in the UK in the London on-premise or bar scene. And I took him on the offer, and it's sort of snowballed since then. I think what's kept me within the industry is it's really fun. It's a really fun industry to be in. And whilst there are some challenges, especially around advertising and marketing, and so there should be, given that it is alcohol. Ultimately, you get to travel the world. There's distilleries in every single country, or wine. I've done both wine and spirits. So there's travel, which I'm also passionate about. It's connected very closely to what I love, food and beverage. And yeah, overall, as I said, it's a fun industry to be in. It's always changing. And I think probably in the last 5 to 6 years, the innovation and the drive for innovation, which I think liquor has been very slow in, if I'm completely honest, has really accelerated. So for me, it's probably the most exciting time within the industry.
I was actually going to ask you, what have you noticed over the 20 years? I mean, digital's obviously changed a lot of industries in terms of how your customers might learn about you or buy from you, but also all this lovely bespoke range that's coming out. It'll be interesting. Yeah, it'd be great to hear what your view is over the 20 years of changes that you've observed.
Yeah, I mean, the craft industry, especially in Australia, has really grown from strength to strength over the last, I would say, it's only probably been in the last 10 years, really, that has grown. Before then, it was big companies like Bacardi, like Diageo, that, got big global brands that were the main players. I think that what it's done, and digital has had the same effect, it's really disrupted the industry, which is a great thing. It's made us a lot more creative. And for me, it's really driven that making sure, it's driven the thinking in the process around keeping the consumer at heart. So I think for a long time, liquor was, what marketers wanted it to be. Now it's really about personalisation, understanding what consumers want. And, you would see that in the last sort of, I guess, 2 to 3 years where health and wellbeing has really played a role. So there's been a real drive for consumers sort of saying, look, we love our booze, but we don't want it every day, and we want an alternative that isn't soft drink and sugar filled. What have you got for us? And that's an example of where I think the industry's really changed. 20 years ago, it would have just been, oh, well, whatever, that's what the consumer wants, but we want to give them this. So I think having that real focus on the consumer at the heart has been the major change. And that's obviously been driven by craft movement, by technology largely, and digital to a large extent.
How much has COVID over the last couple of years changed? I know you talked about the health and wellbeing, but you had that, the digital health wellbeing, and then this kind of like, well, you can't have your normal retail stores or events or the things that would have generated a certain type of purchase. How have you approached that?
Oh, look, I think it's in two halves, right? Half of the industry, unfortunately, the hospitality half, the on-premise, is completely shut, and it's destroyed a lot of businesses and people that have operated in that space. So that's been a real challenge. It's been a challenge to keep our customers, making sure that they are operating. It's such a wonderfully collegial industry that, we've really spent a lot of time at Bacardi caring about our customers and making sure that they can reopen when that part of the sector does eventually reopen. On the flip side, the off-premise has seen massive growth. Last year, the industry probably had its best year, in particular spirits. And that, I would say, has been absolutely driven by digital and in particular social. So what we saw was a huge uptake this time last year when we were in lockdown #1 for those of us in Sydney. I don't know, probably number 13 for those of us in other states. But what we saw was an amazing, the search for cocktails at home, keywords such as mojitos, daiquiris, absolutely flew last year. And that ability for people to take or to buy spirits and then learn about it through YouTube, social channels, to then be able to make them at home was absolutely staggering last year across all the major sort of spirit suppliers that we saw, and smaller spirit suppliers too. And then the third piece to that would be e-commerce. And I think, for us in the spirit industry, we don't generally, it's not a D2C model, it's through retailers. So what we saw was either retailer.com or pure play in e-com really, they had to quickly pivot and be agile and really drive their sales through that channel. And so that for us, we probably looked at that, well, that's a 3 to 4 year plan, and it became a 3 to 4 month plan very quickly.
And how are you going on that journey then? Because you can move fast, but then there's a lot to learn, particularly when you haven't traditionally had, say, first-party data. It's been through those traditional retailers of the past.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest challenge for us. It's the first-party data and not having that one-to-one connection with the consumer. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and Bacardi as a company has got some very big KPIs around, getting that first party data to start that conversation up. And, it's extremely difficult when you're going through the likes of big liquor retailers. We just don't have that. So being creative and also understanding what the consumer wants to hear from us has been a massive learning journey that we've been on. And to be quite honest, it's only happened over the last 18 months.
as a necessity, no doubt.
As a necessity, yeah.
And acceleration. What have you learnt? You talked about, the health and well-being. They're at home, they're being more creative looking, maybe the cocktails as part of entertainment, so they will have more time to create, but also the experience. What have you learned about the profile? Has that changed in terms of who's buying what in your range?
Yes, so spirits, you can break them into kind of the two major categories, which is dark and light. Surprise, surprise. Dark spirits generally have been an older demographic. Light spirits are younger. What we've seen is a just people willing to trial. So, you'll often see on TikTok or Instagram, a 25-year-old making an old-fashioned with whiskey, which probably before this had been really what we saw 40-plus males do, and now we're seeing 20-plus girls drinking, whiskey and making whiskey cocktails. So the experimentation has been a huge, I think, massive difference that COVID sort of come along and given us, which has been great because not all spirits are the same and they have very different tastes, etc., or flavours, sorry, not tastes, flavours. And so it's great to see people just experimenting with it. What we also saw, which was very interesting, was the premiumisation piece. So, our two most premium, super premium brands, Patron Tequila and Grey Goose Vodka, are the two brands that really, saw massive growth. And then on the flip side, Bacardi as a brand, because it's such a, core cocktail ingredient, also saw huge growth in that area that was driven by cocktails.
So I know the wine industry saw a lot of innovation in products, in particular in the way that they were shipping, much more kind of personalised selection and taster kits and all sorts of things where previously they wouldn't have. What sort of product innovations have come out of this kind of change in consumer behaviour and this flip in the model that you were talking about, as well as the kind of tastes and age profiles?
Look, I think, as I've been saying, cocktail and flavour are the two things that have really come to town. You can see it within the gin category where, 5 years ago there'd be 10 gins on shelf and they'd all be clear liquid. Now there's 150 gins on shelf and they're pink and blue and all sorts of things. The main one for us has been cocktails, though, and I think we've seen a massive innovation drive for cocktails in a can, ready to pour cocktails. So whilst people have been really keen on making them from scratch, there's also a certain part of the population that actually wants something relatively easy, that tastes great, that has well-known brands in it. So ready-to-make cocktails that you can simply pour over ice have also seen massive growth within the last year.
So if we talk about that change at the consumer level, what about the distribution, the B2B level? What's changed there through this period? Or how do you think that changes even in the desire to move to the e-commerce model more so?
Look, I think the biggest change in the B2B supply chain piece for us would be if you take Dan Murphy's, for example, you can shop, it's become a marketplace. You can shop on Dan's for hampers as well as wine. But what's changed is that a lot of that comes direct from the supplier. So in the traditional, and most of it, well, I'd say 98% of our business is direct to the customer in terms of big customers, Coles, Woolworths, etc. But the difference now is that those retailers are offering through their e-commerce channels, a real marketplace model, which means that we as suppliers have to change or not, depending on where you are, to look at our model and kind of go, well, how do we supply 2 boxes of booze to a small liquor e-commerce provider rather than a pallet? So it has put in some interesting, or it's given us some interesting challenges in the supply chain model for sure.
Do you mind me asking, you touched on that health side where people might not want everything to be the way that it was, a drink every night. What innovations have been around maybe the non-alcoholic spirits? Have seen that grow as well?
Yeah, there's been a lot of that. And look, it started in beer, and I think beer's developed and have been able to develop a really good tasting product in no alc beers. That was followed by wine, and traditionally in wine, it's actually very difficult to get to a non-alcoholic wine without losing all of the attributes of that wine delivers. Spirits are kind of in between. So what we've seen in spirits is definitely similar to wine in that there's two camps. There's one zero alcohol in it, but still has that more sophisticated flavour that you would get. And then the other one, which is a lower ABV. So for us, for instance, we're just about to launch Grey Goose Essences, which is a lower alcohol by volume product, which means that, instead of getting one, let's say if you pour a nip of 30 ml vodka, that's one standard drink. With this particular product, it's only half a standard drink. So it really plays into that health and well-being a lot. And we've also seen a lot more natural flavours come through. The reduction of sugar's been huge. Seltzers is a key area where we've seen that really grow in the last year, which is totally around no carbs, low sugar, but still the delivery of alcohol. So it's absolutely a huge macro trend that the whole world is sort of facing into.
So how do you use insights? What are your kind of key metrics or measures that you look to? And then say when you're talking about those innovations or rollouts of new products, what are you looking for? Are they different from your main measures? Do you go micro in testing? Like, it'd be good to kind of understand how you use data informing these decisions.
Look, it kind of, it starts at a global level where we still look at macro trends. And so we look at the macro trends that are happening, not just in liquor, but across the world and in every industry. And that generally is by large scale research that still happens, quantitative research. It then sort of trickles down into different areas. So if we talk about health and well-being, we actually do a lot more social listening than we've probably done before, and that plays into the metrics that we look to consider when bringing out a new product. So I think before we would have used traditional research. Now, even things like Google Analytics plays a role in just being able to jump into the data and see what's happening. So cocktails was a great example of where that played a really heavy role in kind of understanding, okay, well, what does our search look like from here on in? What products are we going to really put forward in front of the consumer? So I'd say it's gone from that macro traditional research to being much more, I don't know whether you call it micro, maybe it is, but micro research, which is done through digital means. And it means that, especially the social listening, reviews are amazing on e-commerce. I mean, if you want to see what your product's doing, just jump onto Dan Murphy's website and see what your reviews look like. Whereas that in the past for marketers hasn't really, nobody would have used that. It would have been like, oh, yeah, but that's a fake review and da-da-da. But now they're really legitimate, they're authentic because they are written by consumers. So it's putting that consumer at the heart of everything that we do and listening to them, but in a much more up-to-date or, by the, what's the word for it? Kind of in real time, I guess, versus looking at it retrospectively and then trying to make judgment calls.
Yeah. I mean, coming from, marketing pre-digital myself, qualitative plays a role. There's no question, but nothing is more powerful than actual people's behaviour, right? And so you talk to search queries, that's giving a pretty strong indicator, but what people buy, how they rate it, that's the actual experience. So are there key metrics, one metric in particular you focus on as your health measure, or is there three? Like, how do you
Look, I think it depends on the brand. So we have, brand health trackers, which measure sentiment across maybe 20 different KPIs. And it depends really where the brand is in its life cycle would depend on what measures we look at. And whether they're awareness or affinity levels. Again, for a brand that is starting off on its life cycle, the key one is awareness. So how do we measure that? That's a massive one for us versus something like Bombay Sapphire, which is, even though it holds, the greatest market share of gin, what we're really after there is understanding how people are interacting with it. And so what are those affinity measures? So it's very much unlike the days of 20 years ago where it would just be a set of standardized KPIs across for all brands. They're actually very much tailored to the brand and what we're trying to achieve, and that is all linked to the metrics up front. So we set those generally on an annual basis and track them through various different tracking sort of devices, not devices, what do you call that? Tracking measurement tools.
Platforms.
Platforms, thank you.
So you talked about real time in there. How often are you tapping into the insights? Has that been a change as well?
Yes, it has. I think my team in particular have got very good at that, especially probably in lockdown. When we work with our media agency, there is definitely a sense that we're measuring it and looking at it on an ongoing basis rather than, again, where we would have done years ago, where we would have put a campaign out and then we would have done the measurement and evaluation, and a month later we'd be sitting there looking at kind of how that ad performed, whereas now we're actually looking at it on a day-to-day basis and changing up whatever it may be to make it more effective. So I think that real-time piece has come to the fore, and we have tools. Talkwalker is one that we use at Bacardi, which looks at social and how that's performing, and that's done generally by the brand guys, I'd say at least weekly, to really measure the effectiveness of it and to make any changes, which has been great, which I think is a massive change for our industry within which digital has allowed us to do.
And is that something you've driven, Sarah, or is that like a global top-down kind of broader view?
I would say it's a bit of both. I think it's, a triangulation really of our media agency being, held to account by global and kind of like, well, you guys have got to come to the party here and we want measurement and we want it now. But it's also a change in behaviour with brand managers. They've had to become more digitally savvy and, sort of that training, learning and development of their own sort of understanding of how digital plays. Because I think especially for liquor, when digital came out, it was almost seen as we've got to have a digital marketing team, and that digital marketing team are just going to look at digital. And for years I've kind of, said, well, that's a bit like going back to the 1950s and having a TV, a group of people that are just looking at TV. Digital is part of the comms. It's the 360 degree. I don't think that you can delineate it from anything. It needs to be woven into the whole thing, which means that you need to look at it like you would daily sales.
It's so pervasive. It just is. It's not. Yeah. It's not a separate channel. How has the initiatives in driving your content, social and keyword or SEO strategy, how has that changed for you, and how are you using that? What initiatives are you driving there that you've seen actually result in ROI?
Look, I think, with the SEO strategy, it's making sure that you've got the right investment and, making sure that your share of voice is in line or greater than your SOM. So working really closely with media agencies, with Google, identifying what that level of investment needs to be, upweighting it where it needs. And again, this goes back to looking at it in real time and sort of just measuring it and then being able to hit the button to either upweight or downweight. And for us, the whole thing in SEO, and I think this has been a big change, is just, making sure that you don't lose that relevancy and efficiency. So, as I said, it's like keywords need to be tailored to objectives, whether that's around awareness, inspiring or purchase. And it's the close KPI tracking of it that really, I think we really sort of have honed into over the last couple of years.
I'm really curious with this answer, or your answer to this question, because obviously marketing people, depending on where they've come from, have different views. Some of it is kind of personally driven and some of it's data driven. So I'd love to just see what your thinking is on this. What's the role of creativity in this? How do you measure that and bring the role of creativity, that brand awareness, the actual intent to purchase? What are you seeing? What's your view on its importance?
I think it's hugely important, especially in an industry like ours. I mean, look, in the spirits industry, I think in comparison to wine, brands are much more prevalent and they hold sway a lot more than other areas of liquor. But creativity is not just about what your content looks like, but it's also, it has a role in planning and placement. But at the end of the day, we're in an industry where it's quite crowded, and so to have that cut through is vital. And so to really, again, honing into the consumer and using that UGC to be really effective, working with consumers, working with the likes of influencers that do have influence in the right channels with the right people is also important. But I think it's also, I think, understanding kind of what's right for each channel. So, longer form creativity plays a different role in YouTube than short snackable size pieces in social, for instance. So I think it's increasingly challenging because content. It's like, oh my God, where am I going to get this content from? And the creativity piece, I think we've had to go look at all sorts of, turn over all sorts of stones to find that creativity. And that often comes from, we hone into bartenders now because they're very creative people to come up with creative content for us. We have our brand ambassador team, our advocacy team, looking into creative ways in which to bring content to life. So I think it's hugely important, but I don't think I think it's just the velocity and the amount of content that's driven the creativity. I think marketing has always been a creative sector. It's just that it's kind of on steroids now.
Yes, absolutely. What do you consider your most creative or successful campaign?
I think we were just talking about it this morning, actually. Last year we ran a campaign which basically we shot an ad in New York that cost us $150,000, which is the cheapest ad that Bacardi's ever made, and it was called Roommates. And it was basically two roommates shooting a Bacardi ad in the middle of lockdown, and just having fun with it and then creating cocktails at home. And it completely blasted every KPI that we had. It went absolutely nuts. And that's what I mean about the kind of the user-generated content, doing it in a fun way, and from that, the growth of ambassadors for the brand within that target market was huge. I mean, we often use big stars as influencers and brand ambassadors, but actually what we noticed from that campaign, contextually, it was bang on.
Right at the right time. Yeah.
I mean, New York was in lockdown, but these great shots of, I'll send it to you actually, these great sort of skyline shots of New York and these two girls in their flat just making cocktails. So it's I think it's being, agile and for Bacardi as a multinational corporation, that's not easy. Like as a startup, you can be agile and you can, sort of turn on a dime. But for Bacardi to do that, I think that was probably our best piece of creative, or our best creative campaign I've seen in a number of years, and performed particularly well.
I mean, authenticity would have played into that as well as that timing, right? People can't go to parties. They can't look at the great island boat setting, whatever it was, when they're in lockdown. So I think that's interesting. I mean, watching and talking to a lot, and I've run 2 podcast series through the COVID period. It was interesting watching larger organisations not move as fast as mid-size and smaller organisations, because the survival was just so immediate for smaller companies, and there was lots of delay, but then once the engine cranks up, corporate goes. it sounds like that timing on the decision to run that type of campaign, the 150K roommates campaign, would have been pretty fast going through. Have you seen organisation changes in the way Bacardi are operating, signing off? Like, do you think these are cultural things that will change for the good of the organisation moving forward, or just kind of like reflect us the time we're in?
Yeah, look, I think it's a great question. That one, I think, you know, this talks to people holding roles in companies where, you know, Bacardi is a family-owned, it's the biggest family-owned liquor company in the world. So the families still sit on the board. And when you're dealing with the family's name above the door, to do something like that requires, I think, the leader, and I know the guy that leads Bacardi globally, and he is very well respected and has grown that relationship with his key stakeholders. So I don't think they blink twice at allowing him to do it. But it talks to, I think, his level of leadership. You know, if that was somebody new into the company and had no runs on the board, I'm not sure whether that would have got across the line. I think the fact that Ned is a well-respected marketer that's been with the company for 15 years and led the, if you could say, the rebirth of Bacardi, because in the US many years ago it was dying, and he really turned that brand around. So he comes with credibility to do that. In terms of what decision making looks like moving forward, I think we're fairly lucky. We're quite empowered within our organisation up to a point. Have decisions been made quicker? I think they have. But if you talk about innovation being one of them, yes, decisions have been made quicker than they have in the past on certain brands. On certain other brands, it's still quite a slow-moving beast, and it depends who's heading that brand up, and it depends what the role of the brand within the organisation. Will it look like this moving forward? We're never going to be the fastest, sort of most agile company out there, because we're big and we've got to accept that. But at the same time, you then kind of, I think there's, you've got different companies doing different things. So we have multinational, massive global brands that we need to protect, and making quick decisions sometimes is not the right thing for them, versus a more agile startup where, if they lose, doesn't really matter. There's no brand equity to be lost. So I don't I think moving forward, yes, we've got quicker. Will it continue? Yes, but will it, reach the pace of a startup in terms of turning decisions around that quickly? No.
But I'm glad you touched on leadership style and the influence or currency based on track record. How would you describe your leadership style, and what do you think is the most important trait that a marketing leader should have?
I like to think my leadership style is an empowering style. My style is leading and making sure that I give clear direction, and then sort of getting out of the way and letting people get on with their jobs. I think with that, you need to build trust and mutual respect between myself and everyone that works with me. I think, in terms of leading, sort of clarity and decision-making are key. So I try to be as decisive as I can, knowing that you're not going to have 100% of information. As a leader, that's what you're paid to do. You're paid to make decisions with, maybe only 60% of the information. And so I think even if your decision is not necessarily right, making a decision is key. So decisiveness, authenticity as a leader, and showing vulnerability. I don't know everything. I don't know, as we just said, my sort of knowledge of digital, I'm learning like everybody else is that isn't a digital native. So being open to having, I'm mentored by a guy in France it's a reverse mentoring program, and I'm learning lots about e-commerce through him. So I think it's three things: being authentic, being decisive, leading with clarity and respecting people, and trusting them. And at the end of the day, if they make a mistake, they make a mistake. We learn from it, we pick up, we move on. And sharing that learning, I think, is vitally important, whether it's my mistake or anybody else's.
That's right. And I think the beauty when you're talking about, the fact that you've recognised that digital consumer is that it is measurable. Like, you can make decisions and not wait for the quarter campaign results a month later to make decisions on. You can be actually learning along the way. I mean, having worked with you and also through the MBA, I know you've got that love of learning and you're learning Spanish. You have a role at the University of New South Wales in the AGSM teaching. How does that fit into your passion and your love in helping others?
Oh, look, I think, you and I, as you just said, did the MBA together. And part of that was, I think, the richness in doing an MBA, and you and I have discussed this, is the people that you meet along the way. And it's, yes, the learning is great, because for me, my undergraduate degree was archaeology and art history, so it's got nothing to do with marketing and certainly not business.
But they did drink back then, Sarah.
Exactly. I was in the union all the time, the art history papers. And that ain't far from the truth, I can tell you. But yeah, the learning piece for me, but also giving back, I really like, and I love being with students, and I teach the executive program. So these are students like you and I were, that aren't just straight out of university. They've had, either they're in the middle of a stellar career, or they have quite senior roles. And so for me, it's about learning off them, especially for me being in, having a linear career in terms of industry. So what I found fascinating, like when I met you, you and I were together with the likes of Tristan Harris from Harris Farms, and people from CommBank and finance and engineering, and so it really opened my eyes, and it continues to do that. Understanding how their organisations operate within the marketing space is a great learning tool for me. I pick up as much, I would say, from them as they do from me. And, I really like giving back. It's something that I enjoy doing. I get I'm passionate about it. As you say, I have a passion for learning, but also giving that learning back. And I enjoy leading teams like that too. So it's been fun, hectic, but fun, I think.
Yes. As you also raise your family and keep that balanced. Last question before we go on to our rapid fire questions. Let's share some of that learning that you've had with a marketer. So someone who's listening, they're maybe new or a couple of years in, they may want to get into the liquor industry, or they might just want to have learnt from your experience. What do you think are the key things a marketer should have, the key things that are going to help them be successful?
The main one for me is curiosity. If you're not curious about everything, and I don't just mean about consumer behaviour or brand, then probably you're in the wrong space. You have to be super curious, whether that's looking at the news, what's going on, even to the point of looking in hugely different industries, understanding different people. So curiosity is one. Second one that I think has really come to the forefront and is the commerciality. So years ago, marketing, could be seen, and somebody described it to me the other day, as sort of fluff and bubble. I don't think that's the case anymore. Organisations do not accept marketers that can't run a P&L. And so being commercially astute and understanding that you are in control of that P&L, and you're accountable for that. So if you don't lean into what the commercials are saying, then you're going to find it difficult. So curiosity, being commercially astute. And then I think the third one is having a mindset that is very open to new ideas and to innovation, not just within marketing, but how you take products to market, thinking with a mindset that is open to all sorts of things, because with a closed mindset, you're going to find it very difficult in marketing as a whole to move forward. So, yeah, those would be my three.
I think they're three very important things. I think the I'd add, which is part of that keeping open, is since it's Masters of Metric, right? Metrics that matter.
Oh, and data
is how do you read your insights, right?
Well, it's that I kind of put that,
that's learning,
lump it into the commerciality bit, right? So that's all about your return on investment, making sure that you are investing in the right channels, and measuring it and evaluating it is key, absolutely key, because in marketing you're given lumps of investment to make. So if you're not looking at data and analysis and using objectivity rather than your own feelings and subjectivity.
The great data point of one has to be avoided.
Absolutely.
No, I think it's true. I actually really like that you talked about the commerciality or leaning into that, because I mean, I started in marketing, as you know, that has been my discipline, but I never saw myself as a marketer. It was just how was I growing the business, adding value, helping them achieve their vision. And if I didn't understand the core business
then you can't,
outcomes and what mattered, then you could never connect what you were doing to something that was really going to be valued in an organisation. And then the other thing you realise is marketing isn't just a single discipline in an organisation. Every touch point, every person is responsible for that experience, wherever it is for that customer, and the journey of not knowing you to being the most amazing referrer. So it's good to have that view. So, all right, rapid fire, Sarah, you've done brilliantly. There's so much gold in what you've shared. And I really like that you talk from a leadership on that empowerment level as well. But let's ask you, what is your guilty pleasure?
This is supposed to be quick fire. I think a martini on a Friday night.
Oh, yum. So are you a dirty martini, a dry martini?
Dry martini with a twist.
Ooh, nice. Love it. When you are learning and you're out there, what brand or brands inspire you and why?
What brands inspire me? I know that, everyone sort of talks about Apple, but I still think I love the discipline in which Apple delivers its message, its communication, its design. I think that is phenomenal. So that's one. I also, and I can't really talk, maybe Lego's a good one in terms of kids, but how do you, like the fun and playfulness of brands really attract me. And I think kids brands in particular, they have really changed in how they communicate their message and how they operate. And Lego is a prime example of that. If you look at their retail stores and just how much play they allow to happen in those stores, which I think is just a huge and vast drive away from where, as a kid, I remember going to a toy shop and everything was just on a shelf. And now it's like, actually, they've really embodied the playfulness of their brand and brought that to the consumer, and realised that actually, if you allow kids to play with Lego in a shop, they're going to end up buying it.
And I think, to your point, it doesn't stop at kids, right? I work with a bunch of guys that they have used Lego as one of their key kind of creative pursuits in lockdown, because they've appealed to that creativity and play even in an older age. They're both great brands. If you could pick an age, Sarah, that you could stay for the rest of your life, what age would that be and why?
I reckon probably 45 would be a good age. I think you reach, you're reaching a point where you really, in my mind, you've got a nice blend of experience and wisdom, but you're also still in that trajectory of your career. You've still got a lot of energy. I still think I'm 45. I am always 45. So I haven't, even though
45 forever. So you've already solved it.
45 forever.
How to stay forever.
And for me, it's also, I've got to the point in my life where I'm happy with, contented with where I'm at. career-wise, family-wise, and it's only me, right? But for me, I think that between 45 and 48 would be my golden years.
Sounds good. That's all the time that we have today, Sarah. It's been a great glimpse into your background and your history, and it is an exciting and innovative, creative world. We all are consumers, or have been, even if we might be teetotalers today. I'm not, of course. I'm happy to be a participant in all the
in moderation. All in moderation.
Thank you for all the test product that you gave us while we were studying as well. That was
that was a bit of marketing.
That was very good, very good. Yes. No, Sarah, seriously, I think from a leadership perspective of people in this industry, the need to think about, and you touched on that first party data, particularly when you're in a B2B historic, but you have to know so much about your customer and you're using those key metrics to inform product and that creativity and where to spend your media. Like you've actually given a very holistic view for anyone, not just someone in the industry, but you've given some really great insights there. And I love the campaign example you gave as well. You don't need budget. You just need smarts and be very empathetic and authentic to your customer. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. Great to chat.
As it always is. Thank you, Sarah.
All right. See ya.